My name is Jacques Demotes. I'm the director of ECRIN, which stands for European Clinical Research Infrastructure Network, and I will give you some indication on the organization, the services and the tools developed by ECRIN, the business model, and also the strategy. So this is the agenda. I will start with an overview of the ECRIN mission and the ECRIN strategy. Then I will describe shortly the tools and the services provided by ECRIN to support multinational clinical trials in Europe. Then we will have a few slides on the business model, and we will finish by the strategic perspective. So first of all, the mission and the strategy. ECRIN was supported by the European Commission as an instrument to support multinational clinical trials in Europe and to avoid duplication and to reduce fragmentation of the clinical research in Europe and to create a single area for clinical research in Europe. This started with the first project in 2004 funded by the FP6, during which we defined the strategy for collaboration, and the outcome of the project was that the investigator didn't face major problem in collaborating because they belong to the same society, they publish in the same journals, but the difficulty was the difficulty for the sponsor in clinical trials to act as a sponsor in foreign countries, and especially for the SME sponsor and for the academic organization acting as a sponsor. Then we got a second funding in 2006 to start developing some tools to be able to better support multinational clinical trials. ECRIN was listed in 2006 on the S3 roadmap. Then we got in 2008 a funding for the preparatory phase. Then another project funded by the FP7 in 2012, an integrating activity project, and more recently we got a project funded by the Horizon 2020 to develop the pediatric module of ECRIN. So we got this continuous support, but this is support provided per project. In addition, we applied in 2011 to become an ERIC, and we got in 2013 the ECRIN ERIC status. And we are now one of the landmarks in the S3 roadmap, the 2016 version of the S3 landmark. This means that the core activity of ECRIN is now supported by national funding sources, in fact multinational funding sources, because this money is coming from all the member and observer countries. Just a point regarding the clinical trials. The clinical trials refer to interventional studies that are able to explore the causality and to explore the link between an intervention, the intervention being treatment intervention or preventive intervention or diagnostic intervention. And this is by essence different from the epistemological point of view from the observational studies that are epidemiological studies where there is no intervention and that just show a correlation. So the strength of the clinical trial is that there is no confounding factor and they can demonstrate the causality. There are two main situations where clinical trials are needed. The first situation is the situation where the clinical trial are centered on the product, meaning the objective of the trial is to get the marketing authorization. It is called the registration trial, and this can apply either for the development of innovative health product, where you have to run the phase 1, the first in human, then the phase 2, and then the phase 3 before you get the marketing authorization for new product, or repurposing trial. Repurposing trial means trial who explore new indication for products that are already authorized and already marketed. So this is very important, especially for cancer drug or for treatment on rare diseases. Usually there is no need to run a first-in-man study because the study was already administered to human, but you run the phase 2 and 3. Of course, most of these registration trials are sponsored by the industry, by big pharma, but also by SMEs, especially in the field of innovative treatment using gene therapy, regenerative medicine, or biopharmaceuticals. On the other hand, there is a second category which corresponds to the comparative efficacy or comparative effectiveness trial, where the trial is centered on the patient, meaning the objective of the trial is to determine what is the best treatment option for this patient or for this group of patients or for this disease condition. And the objective is to compare the efficacy, the safety, the effectiveness of healthcare strategy, treatment, prevention, diagnostics that are already authorized and already on the market. And it can apply to drugs, it can apply to medical devices, it can also apply to surgical procedure, to psychotherapy, to physiotherapy. So this is very important. In Europe, you have to consider that if we take into account the data from the EMA, more than 62% of trials are industry sponsored, meaning that 38% of the trials on medicinal products in Europe are sponsored by academic organizations. These pictures show the difference between the industry sponsored and the academic trial. On the left panel, you can see the figures regarding the industry sponsored trial, and you can see that the majority are in dark blue, meaning that these trials are multinational, except in some countries like in Japan, like in the United States, like in China, in India or in Indonesia, where most of the trials are just national trials. And this corresponds to the fact that this country have a large population and also a large number of hospitals, and there is no obstacle in the access to the patient in one single country. But in all the other countries, and especially in the European country, you can see that the industry goes for multinational trials because there is a need to collaborate across the country to have access to the patient and to have access to the medical expertise. If we go now to the right panel with the non-industry sponsored trial, you can see that the vast majority of these trials are run in one single country, except in some situations, like for instance in New Zealand, because they have access to the Australian funding, or in Puerto Rico, because they have access to the NIH funding. So it means that in the majority of cases where the industry goes for multinational trials, the academic organization just use national trials with a restriction in the access to the medical expertise and a restriction in the access to the patients. This is the reason why ECRIN was created, because this is indicative of two things. There is an obstacle in terms of infrastructure supporting the management of multinational trials, and there is also an obstacle in terms of access to multinational funding supporting multinational independent clinical trials. Another point that is very important regarding the management of clinical trial, the situation for the industry sponsored trial is rather simple because the money is coming from the sponsor. The industry invests in the development of new drugs. The industry also developed the protocol and has internal resources to manage the trial, meaning that they design the protocol, they perform the methodology, the biostatistics, the data management, they perform the monitoring, they perform the adverse event reporting, they perform the regulatory submission, and they get the authorization from the ethics committee, and they distribute the drug, the study drug. So this is usually done by the industry either internally, or more recently it is now subcontracting to the so-called contract research organization, or CRO. The CRO perform the trial management task for the industry, and this is an outsourcing by which the industry doesn't have to take care of this trial management task. And by the industry or by the CRO, it's possible to oversee the activities of the investigators exploring the patient. And for one clinical trial, there are multiple investigators in multiple sites and usually in multiple countries, as I mentioned earlier. For the investigator-initiated trial and for the SME-sponsored trial, when they are supported by public money, which is the case, for instance, for the Horizon 2020 funding source, the situation is different because the Horizon 2020 selects project based on scientific excellence. Then the budget, usually 6 million, and you have to keep in mind that the Horizon 2020 funds more or less 20 clinical trials per year. The selected clinical trials are proposed by a principal investigator, and these scientists receive the money. Then the money is redistributed across the partners in the project. But the PI, the principal investigator, doesn't have the capacity to manage the trial, and usually the employer of the PI, university and hospital or any other research organization, play the role of the sponsor. The sponsor sometimes relies on clinical trial unit that are academic organization having the capacity to manage the clinical trial, meaning that they are able to get to perform the design, to the methodology, the data management, the biostatistics, the monitoring of the trial, the adverse event reporting, the regulatory and ethical submission, and other tasks. So this sponsor and the clinical trial unit usually have the capacity to manage the trial in one country, but not in the other country. And the role of ECRIN, which is represented here, is through networking of clinical trial unit in multiple European countries, is to be able to assist the sponsor, to support the sponsor in the management of multinational clinical trials. So this is very important. You have to understand that ECRIN is a service provider to the sponsor and service provider for the management of the trial. They are not directly service provider to the investigator, but in turn they have to oversee the activity of the investigators in multiple countries. So for this reason, we have adopted a distributed infrastructure model by which ECRIN coordinates the services that are provided by the national partners. So we ask each country to get connected to ECRIN to establish a network of clinical trial unit. The network may have different size depending on the country, but what matters is that this clinical trial unit should be able to manage the trial in the country and to perform all the tasks I mentioned earlier. And we ask also each country to establish a single hub in the country, and this single hub will host a person called European correspondent, which is an employee of ECRIN, and this person is hosted in the national hub. And through the networking of this European correspondent located in the national hub of all these European countries, we are able to coordinate the activities performed by the individual clinical trial unit, and we are able to perform the management task for multinational clinical trials in Europe. Regarding the organization of ECRIN, ECRIN is here the yellow part of this picture, and the blue part corresponds to the national partners that are represented by a network of clinical trial units. So ECRIN is composed of a core team based in Paris, plus European correspondents in the different countries. We have currently 1 or 2 European correspondents, depending on the level of activity of the different countries. We have signed framework contract with the national partner. There is a contract between ECRIN, the German partner, ECRIN, the Italian partner, ECRIN, the Spanish partner, that provide the opportunity for them to be seen as linked third party in the Horizon 2020 project, but also defining that the national partner is committed to provide trial management services at non-for-profit cost and also to host the European correspondent. This is the current listing of countries. So we have 9 countries on board as member and observer: Czech Republic, Germany, Spain, France, Hungary, Italy, Norway, Portugal, Switzerland. For each of them we have a city where the national hub is located, and we have our European correspondent in the national hub. This is the name of the national network, and this is the name of the host institution. Now we will start with the tools and services provided by ECRIN. To be able to support clinical trials, there is a need to develop a set of tools that will facilitate the management of the multinational clinical trials and to facilitate also the provision of services by ECRIN. We have developed a series of tools. I will not enter into all the detail of these tools that are accessible through our website. I will just focus on the data center certification program and on the regulatory and ethical database. We have developed a database where all the requirements regarding the regulatory authority and the ethical committees are listed for 22 European countries, and to get an authorization for clinical trials on medicinal product, for clinical trials on medical device, and for clinical trials on nutrition. And this is a very important asset, and now we are starting the process of updating this database, because there will be a new European regulation on the clinical trials on medicinal product entering into force by the end of 2018. Another important tool is data center certification, where quality should be seen as a service. We provide a quality service in the sense that we certify the data center. We have started by defining what should be the standard requirement for GCP compliant, EMA compliant, and FDA compliant clinical trial data management centers. And this resulted in 129 requirements. And based on this, we have established an audit certification procedure by which we are able to audit the centers. The audit takes three days, and after a successful audit, when all the 129 requirements are fulfilled, we provide a certification for a duration of 4 years. So this was just intended at the beginning to certify a few centers to comply with the expectation of ECRIN in terms of data management capacity, but now this has reached let's say an international visibility, and especially we are now starting the process of certifying data center in Japan, in Korea, and in Taiwan. Now we come to the services provided by ECRIN, which is really the core activity of ECRIN. In fact, the core activity of ECRIN is here the trial management services, the number 3. We provide at non-for-profit cost, because this is a commitment of ECRIN, and this is also a commitment of the clinical trial unit we work with. We provide at non-for-profit cost trial management services at the multinational level. And the criteria to be eligible for ECRIN support is that the trial should be run in at least 2 ECRIN member and observer countries. But we don't rule out the situation where there are also sites outside the ECRIN member and observer countries. The trial management services correspond to what I described earlier, meaning submission to the competent authority and ethics committee to get the approval for the clinical trial, trial monitoring, which is an on-site activity, and it is far better to use local resources to perform the trial monitoring, adverse event reporting, data management through the network of certified data centers, and the management of the health product and the management of the biosample. So this is typically the sort of services we provide for each individual clinical trial we support. But before providing this at a non-for-profit cost, we provide for free support in the preparation and the validation of the protocol. During the preparation, we help the investigators in understanding what will be the regulatory requirement, the ethical requirement, the insurance requirement, for instance. We also help the investigators to identify the funding source, and most importantly, we provide support in the funding application, and we also provide support in optimizing the trial methodology and to reinforce the methodological standard of the clinical trial. So this is a very important step, and this is done for free, and I think this is one of the major added value of using ECRIN, is that the chances of getting your application funded will be far higher than the random success rate. And the second step is the validation, meaning once the protocol is accepted for funding, we run in parallel logistical evaluation in order to assess if the trial will be feasible within the budget, within the time frame, and if the patient recruitment will be satisfactory. And at the same time, we perform a scientific peer review of the protocol in order to remove all the possible methodological bias and to make sure that your trial will meet the highest methodological standards. This corresponds to the current trial portfolio. So we currently run a portfolio of more than 40 clinical trials, most of them being funded by the FP7 or by the Horizon 2020 program. You can see that the number of trials per country is decreasing from the country with the highest population size, like Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, to the country with the lower population size. You can see also that the coordinating country are most frequently Germany, France, and Spain. But other countries are also welcome, but we have, and this is something important for us because this increased the workload by the European correspondent in these 3 countries. Regarding the funding, for instance, if we take into account what was funding in 2016, we had 11 new trials funded in 2016. 6 of them are funded by the Horizon 2020. 1 was funded by the Innovative Medicine Initiative, which is a public-private partnership between the pharma industry and the European Commission in Europe. And 4 were funded by an ERANET, the ERANET for rare disease called ERARE. An ERANET mechanism is a mechanism by which there is a single evaluation procedure, and the projects that are selected are funded by national fund, meaning that Italy will pay for the component of the trial run in Italy, Spain will pay for the component run in Spain, France will pay for the component run in France, etc. We have also to establish a proper coordination with Investigator Network, meaning the infrastructure provides generic services. The infrastructure act as generic instruments that are disease agnostic. ECRIN supports clinical trials in Europe for all the different medical disciplines. ECRIN supports translational research for all the medical disciplines. Biobanks, BBMRI support the biobanking in all the medical disciplines. But there is a need to provide the medical discipline and the investigators network with adapted, let's say, services in the different medical specialty, for instance, in brain disease, mental health, cancer, cardiovascular, nutrition, infectious disease, vaccine, pediatric, rare disease, etc. And so for this reason, we have put in place an arrangement with some of them. We have established partnership, and the idea that this medical discipline, this investigation network, provides first the scientific content, meaning the protocol, and they provide also the investigation capacity. And for instance, we had an opportunity to apply for an Horizon 2020 funding in the field of pediatrics, and we have developed this ECRIN project by which the European Commission is supported the development of tools that are specific for the management of pediatric trials, and this is done in conjunction with the pediatric research community. We want also to provide our investigators in Europe with the opportunity to collaborate outside Europe, and this is extremely important, especially for the very rare disease where there is a need to recruit patients outside Europe. We have started with bilateral cooperation agreement with Australia, with Korea, with the US, with Brazil, with Japan, and we are also co-leaders in an initiative called CRIG, meaning Clinical Research Initiative for Global Health, where we play the role of the secretariat together with the US NIH, and we have OECD and WHO as partners in this project. And in this project, there are in fact 6 sub-projects on infrastructure and funding, global core competencies, research ethics, patient involvement, comparative effectiveness research, and socio-economic impact and regulatory awareness. So this project has started on the 1st of January 2017, and we expect this project to provide a framework for international collaboration. And this project is a follow-up of the previous OECD initiative on the cooperation in non-commercial clinical trials. Now we come to the ECRIN business model. I will just provide two very simple figures regarding the business model to help you understand how we work and what are the possibilities in terms of development. What is the situation in the clinical trials funded by Horizon 2020? I told you that from one year to another one, the mean number of clinical trials funded by Horizon 2020 is in the range of 20. And the budget allocated, the mean budget allocated to one individual clinical trial funded by Horizon 2020 is 6 million euros over 4 years. So it means that 1.5 million euros per year. This budget is distributed between all the beneficiaries in the consortium, and ECRIN is one of the beneficiaries. Usually we are the work package leader on the work package on clinical trial management. So ECRIN is here, the yellow part of the picture. ECRIN receive money and then redistribute money to the national partners, either as subcontractors or as linked third party. And most of the money, so the money that is given to ECRIN, the partner, correspond more or less to 10% of the total budget of the clinical trial, meaning 600,000 euros over 4 years. But in fact, the component that is left to ECRIN is a very small component. It is between almost 0 to maximum 50,000 euros, and most of the budget is given to the national partners. So this is a way for us to attract activities from this project and then to redistribute the activity and to redistribute also the money to the national partners. And if we consider the budget, for instance, this corresponds to the 2017 provisional budget. We have a provisional budget in the range of 6 million euros, but these 6 million euros correspond to 3 different things. First of all, the contribution of the members and the observers. Second, the capacity building project, most of them being funded by Horizon 2020. And then the support to the clinical trials, the operational support to clinical trials. If we consider first the contribution of member and the observer country, this corresponds to 2 million euros, from which 0.8 million euros go to the European correspondent. This corresponds to the budget allocated to the salary plus operation cost of the European correspondent, and 1.2 million euros goes to the core team in Paris for the development of tools and for the structuring activities. The second source of funding is the capacity building project, for instance, the pediatric project, for instance, the Corbel project with the other research infrastructure. This corresponds more or less for 2017 to 1 million euros, and this goes mostly to the core team. And then there are the revenues related to the clinical trials activity. This corresponds more or less to 3 million euros. A very small amount is going to the core team, and it is going to the core team when there are countries who are not member or observer, where we have no European correspondent. The resources for the project management are hosted in Paris in the core team. A more significant amount of money, 300,000 euros, is going to the European correspondent, and especially to the European correspondent in the country coordinating the project, because this European correspondent really takes the leads of the network of European correspondent in the project management activity. And most of this money coming from the clinical trials activity is going to the national partners in the countries involved, and this corresponds to the trial management services performed in the country. If we consider all the budget related to the clinical trials, in fact it is not about 3 million, it would be about 30 million, because you can see that when we generate 3 million money to support the clinical trial, this corresponds to just 10% of the total budget of the clinical trial. So it means that through this activity, it is about 30 million that is redistributed to the national clinical research systems. Now we come to the strategic perspectives. just a few points. One of the major issues for us is the quality management. You can understand that the quality management in a distributed infrastructure is something very complicated, because not only we have the core team in Paris plus the European correspondent located and hosted by the national hub, but we have also to make sure that the quality of services is supported by an appropriate quality management system in the partner clinical trial unit. So this is a major challenge, but in the context of the reproducibility crisis, where the low credibility of research data in the biomedical field is something that becomes now a prominent problem, we have to make a very strong effort to demonstrate that the data generated by ECRIN and the services provided by ECRIN meets the highest level of quality. So for this, we have, for instance, put in place the quality as a service. For instance, we have started with the data center certification. We will do the same for the adverse event reporting, and we are considering how we will perform such a qualification or certification for the clinical trial unit we work with. But we are considering now, but I think the answer will be given very quickly, whether we should go for an ISO certification. But what is sure is that if we want to be able to provide services for the industry, especially for the registration trial, there will be a need for us to get this ISO certification, which will correspond to 1.5 years of efforts and a lot of investment from the team and also from the financial point of view. So the quality management is one of the major problems. Another challenge is the challenge related to the scaling up of the activity. We have now more or less 10 new trials ongoing every year. So this implies that we have to adjust the workload of the European correspondent, especially in the country with the highest number of coordination, which are currently Spain, Germany, and France. And we have to adapt the size of the team and the distribution of the work to make sure that there will be no overload in this European correspondent. Third point, currently ECRIN is just a service provided to the sponsor. We are not the sponsors in clinical trials. Currently we are under the 2001-20 directive that says that there should be one single sponsor in the European Union. Currently we don't want to become a sponsor, but this is on the agenda of the strategic plan. In 2018 we should make the decision on whether ECRIN should become a sponsor or not. But there will be a new feature, because now with the new regulation voted in 2014, there will be the possibility to be a co-sponsor. So I think that what we will explore is to be a co-sponsor, like being the co-pilot in an aircraft. We will be sitting just on the right side of the pilot, and we will provide a lot of indication, which is very important for us, because currently in some projects we are not work package leader, we are not the sponsor, and it is sometimes difficult to make the sponsor understand what is required to have the project running smoothly. Another critical question for us is to know whether we should go for services to the industry. I must say that currently we have, I would say, 10 to 15% of the ongoing trial whose sponsor is an industry sponsor. But in this case, they are funded by Horizon 2020. They are funded by public money, but sponsored by small company, by very small company, usually spin-off companies. The situation is different if we consider being service provided to the industry without getting funds from the public sources. And we have in this case to make the difference between the SMEs, who usually don't have the capacity to manage multinational trials, versus the big pharma who have the capacity to manage multinational trials, either internally or externally by subcontracting to contract research organization. We have also to make the difference between the registration trial that raise a lot of anxiety from the sponsor's point of view, because they may be subject to inspection from the Food and Drug Administration or from the EMA, versus the non-registration trial, where the sponsors are less anxious because the challenge in terms of getting access to the market are lower. In some cases also the industry are interested in running post-marketing safety studies, because either they want to have information on the safety of the product after the product has accessed the market, or because this may be required by the regulatory authority. So we have to consider this different sort of configuration: SMEs versus big pharma, registration trial versus non-registration trial, and we will try to make an opinion. I think the first thing we should consider is rather to provide support to SMEs, either for registration trial or maybe in some cases for post-marketing trials that are requested by the competent authority. Another question, because if we want to really invest in providing services to the industry, since we have an ECRIN status, you know that in the ECRIN status there is an upper limit in terms of activity performed under the economic model, meaning that we can work at market prices, but only for a maximum of 20% of our activity, which is a very strong limitation. I think if we decide to really provide services at market prices to the industry, having this upper limit doesn't make sense. But in this case, we would consider the possibility of creating a spin-off company owned 100% by ECRIN to provide the services to the industry at market prices. This is a question that is currently listed in our strategy plan, and we are expected to provide an answer by the end of 2018 or beginning of 2019. And there are two other important strategy points. The first one is the issue of the cooperation with the Investigation Network. I just mentioned the issue of cooperating with pediatricians, and we have a similar request from many investigators network focusing on one medical area, and we have to establish the best possible partnership, avoiding duplication and taking advantage of the European defragmentation of the instrument supporting multinational clinical trials and of the European defragmentation of investigation network in a given disease area. And the last point is that we have also to further explore how best to collaborate with the other biomedical science research infrastructure, and especially with BBMRI for the biobanks and ECRIN for the translational research. Thank you very much for your attention.